Kia ora koutou, ko Jeremy Webb toka ingoa. Thank you very much for coming here tonight. This is actually the first ever in-person Tiaki Institute event. So it's a big milestone for the Tiaki Institute, but more importantly, it's a chance to hear about the amazing work that Alicia, Anna, and Amelia have done for us. You're probably wondering, what is the Tiaki Institute? What's this thing that these guys have spent a whole summer working on? So the Tiaki Institute is basically a think tank. It's something I co-founded with some former colleagues from the United Nations. And it's one of those things where you know when you're working day to day in your office and you're going, you know what, there might be a better way. Or maybe we could do this. So all of those ideas piled up year after year. And eventually I thought, you know, let's try putting together a vehicle where we can actually engage in these ideas and find a way to make them happen and work with others around that. So I set up the Tiaki Institute around 2016 as the first iteration, and then again around 2020 with my colleagues, and worked on a few things, but it was more or less trying to do it on my own in terms of my personal ideas. And you know how when you talk about ideas, because obviously think tanks about ideas, huh? So we often imagine someone toiling away into the basement and coming up Eureka and trying to, that's one way of trying to do it, but it's interesting to see that, you know, when you look at the arts, there's a more growing body of literature showing that some of the famous artists didn't just do it by themselves. They were working with others who did a bit of the background or did a bit of this at various stages. And so one thing I've realised more recently is that doing it by myself is an incredibly inefficient way of doing things. Secondly, not only is it better to work with other people on things, you're building up a group of fit, but the other thing is it's a creative process. It's not that the vision you have at the outset is what you end up with. It evolves, it changes. So what we have here is 3 sets of work, ideas that I've been thinking on over the years in different parts of the UN system where I've been working, including UN Statistics Division, doing climate change work and other things. And I'm going, hang on, there might be a better way. And these guys have each taken one of the projects each and worked on it over the summer and made it their own. So they'll be presenting that. The PACE program, if you don't know, is a fantastic program. Alicia reached out to me at the end of last year going, can I do an internship? I'm like, well, I'm in the government at the moment and there's nothing really good at the government that I can link up with, but I could link up with Tiaki Institute. Then I stepped out to make room to do more of these ideas, and I got back in touch with PACE and said, are there any other amazing, talented people? And they said, yes, there is. Got Anna and Amelia. So that's how I ended up with 3 for the summer, and it was absolutely fantastic. You guys have done amazing jobs working on these projects. So that's my part of the story. That's what the Tiaki Institute is. And without any further ado, I'm going to pass the mic on to Amelia. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Cool. Well, I'd like to first introduce the presentation and introduce Gemma. Gemma is starting her year off with getting back into Pilates, looking after her mental health, and is considering switching her non-organic diet to a more organic diet. And so she makes around $550 a week, and she's wanting to put aside $115 towards her groceries. Gemma wants to know if investing in a greener and more organic lifestyle is worth $115 and if it's a worthy long-term investment for her. As an advocate also for climate change, she wants to make sure that she can keep supporting green farmers and suppliers. So knowing Gemma's long-term plan, what can we do to help her? What kind of information do we need to collect and analyse so that Gemma feels confident in her organic diet plan? And so, my role for this project was to develop do no harm metrics and related evaluation frameworks. My aim was to showcase the true cost of supermarket prices alongside trade aid prices as well, and showcase an analysis of if indeed an organic lifestyle is investable to even help protect the environment. Moving on to my methodology, just briefly. First, I went over the Stats NZ data and trade data and found similar food groups between them. The foods that I chose to create my All Foods Index, which I'll be presenting later on as well, were milk and dark chocolate, drinking chocolate, long grain rice, ground coffee, instant coffee, olive oil, herbal tea, and white sugar. So then in each foods of each data set, if there were different unit sizes, for example, if StatsNZ data was higher in grams, then I would either scale up or down that towards trade aid. Then I would move each data set of a particular food item into its own column in a huge Excel spreadsheet and calculate the difference of both. I would then generate graphs of each food and showcase the price trends from StatsNZ and trade aid side by side. And additionally, I would draft up a draft index, which I'll present later as well, of only snack food, and generate an index that was also generated for all goods chosen from each data set. Finally, I would conduct research to identify the reasons to the trends that I'm seeing in the data. Moving on into some examples. So for example, in the first graph, it presents that trade aid's primary goal is to support sustainable livelihoods, which is why they keep their prices rigid over time, which is that orange line at the top, and then the one below it is the StatsNZ data trend. Additionally, the price volatility is also being stabilised within trade aid supply chain model. Moving on to the second graph just below it, it presents questions around trade aid's competitiveness with supermarket prices and why have they done so to match with the price fluctuations that we see here. Additionally, it may be that both struggle with similar production costs, for example, jasmine rice. Moving on to the next one is showing stagnant activity. Not surprising, as we have seen that trade aid prices tend to stay consistent and there's little to no volatility within food pricing in a small sample of goods that I've named as my snack index. Here are all foods I chose from the StatsNZ supermarket data, which shows a different story, greater volatility over the same period of time, though this only happened between a $5 margin. Profit maximisation presents that these price fluctuations for these supermarket goods were not present in trade aid, as I'll show in a second. Trade aid, on the other hand, showed greater volatility over time and even matched food price index that I found from StatsNZ. So we can see here that it matches up between the 2010 and 2012 period. There was some influx in price and then suddenly drop, and so that's also matching up. Oddly, that didn't actually show in the last one, that didn't show up on the StatsNZ data, so that will be something I'll be looking into in the future. So what does this mean for GEMA? GEMA is rest assured that trade aid will provide price stability in the long run. Specifically, the prices of goods are less likely to significantly fluctuate upwards. Purchasing goods over a course of period of time that are less likely to fluctuate is better for long-term investment, even if that product is highly priced initially. Profit maximisation is one of the main fueling factors for fluctuating prices, which is not what trade aid prices represented at the time. To produce a data set that will prove that sustainable eating is not only worth it for the planet, but also for the pocket, I will need to collect hundreds of other more data sets and conduct research in different avenues. However, with what GEMA knows now, she can start to feel a little bit more confident about investing in organic lifestyle that will hopefully shortly be a reality. Moving on to a bit of a SWOT analysis of my project over the last 2.5 months. Some of the strengths for that, I created a brand recognition, bringing back trade aid as a strong competitor in the chocolate industry. As we saw in the examples before, trade aid is committed to keeping prices affordable, less volatile, and reflect consumerism more than profit maximisation. And it's also a unique form of research and display of data. This has never been done before, so it was quite a fun project to do, starting from scratch actually. But some of the weaknesses, there was lack of data available, especially for trade aid. It was quite a small data set that I was working with, alongside a StatsNZ data, which was twice as big, so there was less comparable food prices that I could have used. So like I mentioned before, there was only 9 foods that I could compare and compare the differences. Hopefully in the future I can provide bigger data sets, maybe looking in the US, for example, and Europe, and using that as well. Another weakness was it's quite a laborious project. It was only me working with a huge Excel spreadsheet. So hopefully maybe using AI in the future and making it maybe more like an automation. Maybe later on I can get a data set into the Excel spreadsheet and it already formulates the differences for me and generates the graphs, and et cetera, et cetera. Moving on to some of the opportunities, like I mentioned before, bridging the gap between them and sustainability. I wasn't able to bridge that gap too much. It was only 2.5 months of data work, so hopefully I can do that later and kind of more put it towards the do no harm and bring that together and put it towards the other projects as well. And then also another opportunity is after building that greater database, I can hopefully bring it back into the public space and start creating a customer trust between what customers see out there. And some small threats is that there might be competition later on. Someone could get there faster than me, just being a single unit. So hopefully maybe grab a greater team so we can collect more data more efficiently and faster to get to a result. And then also another threat being the disinterest from the public, or maybe even from the government as well. Not a lot of people like data, but making it visual, making like that snack index that families can talk about, making it more personal is something that I would definitely look into a lot more. And some next steps, I've kind of already gone over it. Yeah, hopefully looking at some data from the United States from their trade aid, and then just moving on to the do no harm metrics, kind of using a sustainability approach of that. And then finally, I would also like to put more time and effort in the last two projects, the electric as well, and putting more research efforts into the global net zero resource assessment as well. That's quite a big project, so it'll be good to collect more data for that. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions? I've got 10 minutes, we're going to sit here silently.
I have a question. You said one of your threats was the lack of interest, but I would have thought that given the interest everywhere around healthier eating and sustainability, that it would actually be something you'd get quite a lot of.
Yes, that's right. But I guess the main concern is just having like the stats in Z domain of just raw data just lying there and making it a bit more visual. So with the snack index is something a bit more personal. People are like, oh, we're going to talk about this food group. And then also later on, I would like to make like a Christmas index. That is kind of like an annual project. You're going to add more data in every year, and it's something that like families could sit down at the table and be like, talking about foods that you eat at Christmas time and talk about the price differences over the years. So
it's a comms exercise as well as a
yes, that's right. Making it more visual, more personal, something easier to talk about. And it's quite data can be quite jargony, so making it more ground level and building on from that. Yes.
On your penultimate slide, those two large projects that you mentioned, I don't actually nothing about either of them, but can you just give us just a tiny little bit of background? Because they sounded like they were quite significant.
The Epic Electric World Records will actually be something we're presenting that right at the end. That will be, I won't do any spoilers for that. And then for the second project, no spoilers as well, because that is actually the next presentation after mine.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Not now too
maybe
late.
you needed a little taxonomy at the presentation at the beginning, but yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask someone in the audience if they've got any observations. Dennis, do you have any observations? Because you've also been working, giving some advice along the way.
Yeah, I'm one of the directors of Trade Aid, so to get the information across there, and it's really quite. It's actually quite a delight to see someone using our data and then use it to compare with. But it is really complex. So the pricing, what you see is flat. That's mostly because the pricing that you get as a consumer is dependent upon what we're able to pay for not the supplier, but the partner. So it's a very different trading model that actually treats our supply chain as partners, and we have adopted them for many years. And I have to say one more thing. So all of those who know trade aid, we've had to close all our shops because of the business model, but we still coffee, tea, drinking chocolate is still continuing. So that's all. Everything up there is valid for the future.
Awesome. Let's move on.
So I'll mention one thing. I think I want to explain why I want to ask the media to do this project. And you said it, do no harm. So at the moment we go to the shops, and do we know what we're buying is doing no harm or not? Do we know whether it's involving forestation illegally somewhere or not? Do we know if it's using slave labour somewhere or not? No. The answer is no. And governments around the world are not enforcing laws around that and saying you can't trade those things. So when we go to the store, we could be buying anything. And then secondly, some of those things are doing harm on the human side, other things are doing harm on the environment side. And so I used to work on environmental accounting, and we started applying econometrics to the environment. It was like, hang on, the environment's not the problem. Putting a dollar sign on the environment is actually the solution. The solution is saying, hang on, what are we doing with our own economic activities? And that got me thinking about what is the do no harm part? Can we measure the part of our economy that's doing no harm and seeing how that's doing? And you've heard of this thing called green economy. Well, if you're measuring the do no harm part, that's literally measuring the green economy. It goes from being some vague idea, which at the moment is talked about, but never can't be actually put into words or a number. The media has put it into a number in terms of here's a category of do no harm products. If you were to buy that stuff, you know that you're not doing any of the bad things, you're only doing the good things. Which then raises the question, that price difference, what's the true cost? So it gives us an opportunity to start engaging with the do no harm economy, not just in terms of the product and labelling, but also in terms of understanding what does it mean for our economy? We have a price index. So that's why I thought, wow, which projects do I choose? I thought I need to get someone into the do no harm price index. So Amelia, thank you very, very much. Absolutely smashed it. And Dennis, also thank you for your data. That's very much appreciated. So again. Right, I think there was a question from the audience. What's GloNZRA?
Yeah, so I'm Anna and I've been working on GloNZRA, and I've had the privilege of being able to collaborate with a really talented international team, so from these groups here, and being able to work under the mentorship of Jeremy. So the problem, so we've all heard about climate change, we hear it all the time. So, you know, fossil fuels, coal, oil and gas. We're burning these, we're using this for our energy, but then this is releasing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and from that, we're trapping the heat from the sun. And this has a variety of impacts, like changing the climate, weather patterns, which is devastating for the planet. What's also interesting is that a lot of data, like around fossil fuels, minerals, renewable energy sources, these are kind of kept in their silos. We don't really see them brought together. Like the different departments will deal with them separately, but there's not much opportunity to look at them holistically. What else is interesting is that often the classification of resources is done at a small granular scale, so looking at the project level, because people are interested in this project, can we make money from it? If we invest in it, will we be able to turn these resources into reserves? Will we make money back from it? This isn't really done at a large national scale. So, fossil fuels are bad and data is in its silos. So how can we create a fairer comparison for renewables and non-renewables? So as part of this brings us to the primary energy dilemma. So often when we're looking at sources, we'll be presented with some data and we have the primary energy is what is typically displayed. So we have oh, fossil fuels, there's so much, how are we ever going to catch up with this renewables? There's so much less. Obviously, fossil fuels is the better choice. But in reality, if we're looking at secondary data, we can see that you can't actually capture more than 33% of the energy from fossil fuels if you want to use it, for example, for transport. Like if you actually want to implement it for motion, so much of that is lost. But if we look at the renewables, only about 5% is lost. So we can see how much more efficient that is. So the solution, we have GloNZRA to save the day. So this is a partnership, and I've been working with a bunch of volunteers, and together we're making this global assessment of, first we have the fossil fuels, which we want to forego. And we're also looking at the renewable energy sources. So what can we use to substitute for the fossil fuels, because these aren't producing the detrimental greenhouse gases. We're also looking into the minerals, because we need those to make our renewable energy technologies. So like solar panels, for example. And importantly as well, we've also included carbon sequestration potentials in the assessment, because even if we convert from fossil fuels to renewables, what about the damage that's already been done and the greenhouse gases we've already released? So how can we mop those up and take them out of the atmosphere and kind of try and reduce the damage that we've done? So the vision for this is, how can we create a magic mirror through GloNZRA if we are making national resource estimates rather than small project estimates? Can we compile a picture where countries can see how well they're doing, and then they can compare themselves to others? So usually when you present this kind of national level data, you can't help but say, oh, how's my country doing? What about my friends? What about my enemies? So that's kind of the ideology behind the project. So through this, we could be able to make the countries realise that they do have the potential to forego fossil fuels, but actually look at all this renewables that we have, look at all the minerals that we have. We could do something with this. But as part of this, we don't just want breadth, we don't just want to cover all the countries that we can. We also want depth. We want to look at not just the viable resources, but what about those that are potentially viable? What could we potentially use in the future? And what about prospective resources? We want to give countries a really comprehensive picture so they can see what they have and how they can move with this in the future. And could this move the dial? And we're actually really lucky to have master's students from University College London who will get to work on this and see how people react to the project. Do countries, how do they react? Do they take this on? Do they think it's useful? Or what could we change to make it more engaging and to make it more successful? So, underlying this, we have the United Nations Framework Classification for Resources. So what's really good about this is that it uses inclusive language firstly, so we can classify not just minerals or fossil fuels, which is typically more popular, but we can include the carbon sequestration potentials and the renewables in that as well. So what else is good about this is it also has the potential, like we can see not just the viable, as I said, but what is the potentially viable and what is the prospective to create that bigger picture. So my role in this, so as with the UNFC, I've been able to also help create a glossary which has helped us look at other schemas and other frameworks and how can we convert the data that we've been finding and put that under the UNFC classification framework. A main part of my role as well has been creating the master table. So that was looking at the United Nations Energy Statistics Database and the BP Annual Statistical Review, and that's been getting us kind of the foundation, like the viable resources to start off with. So that's part of our minimal viable product, but we're hoping, as I said, to get more depth into that. And I've also played roles in helping to coordinate the volunteers, so develop lots of skills in that. So, what did we achieve? So we were super lucky to get those volunteers from around the world, and they helped us start with conducting a literature review. So what's cool about this is because they're international, they can speak heaps of different languages, so we were able to use sources that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to read in the first place. For example, like we had one talented volunteer who made a resources tracking matrix for us so we could see what countries do we have data on, what countries do we need to look into further, and in what areas. So, as I said, I've been working on the master table, but now we're working with the data ingestion team, and we're starting to process some of the resources that we have gotten from our initial literature review. Where is the overlap? What do we need to look into more? So what's cool as well, we've had a super talented humble IT guy from Hungary, and he actually made us GloNZRA Junior, which is our AI chatbot. So we're working on integrating this with our website/interface, and how can this chatbot present data? Can we train it to teach people about the UNFC? Why have we chosen that? All about our project, but also potentially in the future, how could we use artificial intelligence to make the processing easier, as I've done a lot of that manual work and it takes a very long time. So we are currently working on as well, starting to plan our presentation, because coming up we are presenting GloNZRA at Resource Management Week to the United Nations in Geneva. So we're currently working on our minimal viable product and trying to get as much done as we can before then. So in the future as well, we might, as we developed the project as well, we may present at future conferences, or we might be able to reach out to other organisations as they might be able to give us more data. But as we get our foot in the door at Resource Management Week, this might open doors for us to pursue further opportunities that maybe beyond this even we could publish the works in a journal, or this might be something that gets updated annually, for example, and the new data that comes in, we can add it to the project to create that comprehensive picture. So this, I just included this picture that Jeremy made because it's kind of showing you how we are going through the process of classifying. So we started with our literature review, and now that's kind of how we are working through that at the moment. But for myself, I just loved PACE 395 and working with Jeremy so much that I decided to do PACE 295, so I'm still doing that this semester. And yeah, our main focus is pretty much mainly on Resource Week, but it will be cool as well to see what the MPA students can bring from their project, which is kind of on top of GloNZRA, to see, using their connections from different countries, to see how they react to the project. So that's really exciting. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm excited to keep working on this.
Any questions?
Just going back to possibly your second or third slide. Hang on, no, maybe it was before that.
Before?
Yeah, that one.
Yes.
I was just thinking we need to be a little bit careful about this. I see what you're saying, but so fossil fuels, something like a litre of petrol's got about 12 kilowatt hours of energy, but as you say, if you turn it into mechanical motion, you lose between 2/3 and 3/4 of it, which is correct. But the renewables, that's fine, but a solar panel, for instance, is only about 20% efficient, so only 20% of the energy that's hitting that solar panel from the sun actually ends up in your battery, and then you're down to your sort of 90% when you come out.
Okay.
And likewise, if you use something like hydrogen that you produce by electrolysis from solar or wind power, it's an inefficient process, so there's inefficiencies everywhere.
Yeah.
You could counter that by saying, well, the fossil fuel was incredibly inefficient to produce in the first place because the trees wasted most of the solar energy before they turned into coal and oil. But it's just a thing to remember when you're looking at
Okay, yeah, I'm definitely not an expert. I just wanted to kind of make a visual example of how often we see things with primary energy, and it's not as efficient as we might think. It's not as perfect as we think, and we get
it's
we
horribly
get these big numbers.
imperfect, I agree, but apples to apples compared to Florida.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
I think you can build the whole thing into the classification system though, which would be.
Well, maybe mention some of the units we're looking at presenting. So in terms of, for example,
yeah, because we want to make the way we present the data more engaging, but also in a way that people can understand. So we're looking, instead of saying there's so many thousands, hundreds of thousands of joules or how many petajoules we can get out of this, we're also looking at trying to convert that into a more accurate way that's saying like, oh, well, how far could you travel in an electric vehicle versus an ICE vehicle? So we're looking at different ways to try and portray that more accurately, but also so that anyone can be like, oh, that makes sense, I can see how that would work. Otherwise, only an expert would be able to see, understand when we're talking about how many tons of a resource that we have. Yeah.
that was a good one. Any other questions?
What kind of reception do you think states at the UN would have for this sort of mechanism or indication? Like, do you think they'll take it on board and say, wow, this is awesome?
Well, we're hoping, because this national level assessment has never been done before. It's always at the project level. So they might, the experts who are always looking at it at a project level might be like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? No one does this. But we're hoping that people will see the vision and see what we're trying to do, and hopefully they will react positively and take that up. But I guess we're also having, hopefully, volunteers who will get to engage with the people and find out, do people actually care? Do people think it's going to work? That kind of thing. So, yeah, stay tuned.
I'll tell a story on top of that, because you have heard it before. So I used to work in the UN Statistics Division, and the most contentious issues were human development index was one of them. I forget what the other one was. Why was it contentious? Because data was put up by the UN about the member states, and that's where the metaphor for the miracle was from. Every member state couldn't help but look at themselves and compare themselves, not least because there was a ranking. And so that was the one every year, the UN StatCom, that countries really cared about. There were lots of other important technical discussions. So that's where we're hoping. It's a hypothesis, we're kind of testing it. Yeah. So we're hoping that we get the same reaction for this. Maybe we do.
For there to be change, you have to unpack this sort of thing so that people can become educated to create the change.
Yeah.
So if nobody looks at it, then we won't become aware, we won't think about it, we won't talk about it, we won't delve deeper.
And then we'll talk about this heaps of times like that. This is the kind of the theory of change for everything we do, and Tiaki is just hopefully people engage with it and move a little quicker and try something a little earlier. And that moving the, I think you had moving the dial on here, right? That's what moves the dial. Exactly, yeah. That's exactly what we're hoping for.
Well, I think of, I'm from education, so I think of Enviro Schools, which was put into schools, and the impact it's had on communities in such a short space of time. So if you build things that can then become, get into schools, we do change generations through that, slowly but surely.
So, and Anna's mentioned the coordination role she's had, and that's not to be underplayed. We've had, 4 meetings already this week, is that right? And we've got one tomorrow morning as well. So every morning this week, we've got another 7 or 8 in the morning to discuss with someone or a group of people globally coordinating. But you know whose name they all know? Who do you call? You call Anna if you want to get something done. So not only doing the technical work, ploughing through loads and loads of data, but getting an international reputation being the person who responds and makes sure that whatever queries they have get answered. So it's been an absolutely outstanding piece of work. Thank you so much. Awesome. And now, Alicia on now something completely different, huh?
Kia ora, grazie, welcome. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. I did my work on climate mitigation taxonomy. And throughout my presentation, I've just got some questions to think about, just so you know you're listening. So what does ASI stand for? What is a low embodied energy and low carbon building material? Okay. So I did my work on climate mitigation taxonomy. I analysed the IPCC's 6th assessment report on climate change mitigation options. The report provides the latest global assessment of progress in reducing emissions, key developments in mitigation strategies, and pathways for achieving long-term national climate goals. There are 17 chapters that focus on different areas, including transport, buildings, energy systems, and more. My task was to go through the chapter's graphs, figures, and tables to synthesize a comprehensive aggregate breakdown of the mitigation options into a hierarchical classification list, forming a taxonomy of mitigation options that creates an easy way for people, particularly policymakers, to quickly identify relevant mitigation strategies for their specific areas of concern. Rather than going through the whole chapter, this classification helps streamline decision making, making climate action more accessible and effective. So here it is to show the process I took to create the taxonomy by analysing the chapter and copying the chapter's data only from the graphs, figures, and tables into an Excel spreadsheet, aggregating the data into sections, which was a very messy process, by merging and organising the data into concise sections, and then next putting it all into a final list, and then once I've completed all of the 17 chapters, putting them all into a final master list. So these are the guidelines Jeremy and I came up with so that it would stay consistent throughout each chapter. It needs to be comprehensive, not partial. Formation is principles first, then actions. And then the grouping structure format I used for the lists on Excel. The numbers represent a non-overlapping category, something that cannot belong to two different numbers. The capital letters, a different overarching grouping, meaning broad themes or sections. Small letters indicate the same level, a subcategory of related items within the same category. Here's an example. So that's pretty much what my work looked like, but even longer, the Excel spreadsheet. But this is an example of a classification list for transport. Sometimes it was as simple as copying and pasting what is said in the figure and putting it straight into the list. Here, I categorized them into short, medium, long-term approaches. And within the small list, there are some ASI strategies. And we'll look into the medium-term approaches. Yeah, this is the ASI framework. Avoid, shift, improve framework. These are mitigation strategies that we can adapt to easily. Because my first assumption of the IPCC reports, I didn't realise most things are a lot simpler to adapt to in regular day life. So the lists are also a great tool for us all to look through and what we can implement, such as to avoid by living car free, to shift by switching to public transit, to improve switching to EV when possible. Some options were simpler for all citizens and individuals to work on, and some options were more for the governmental global level to achieve. This is just a very simple example. Another example from the chapter on buildings, where I didn't just copy and paste the data as some of the other areas. It's a bit more time intensive having to work out the list myself, categorizing the full mitigation options to the moderate options. As seen here, bamboo and timber is the suggested low embodied energy and carbon resource used for building materials. Just a few examples. So this work is important as emissions rise, causing more harm to the climate crisis, as shown in this figure of the direct and indirect emissions produced by each sector. By adopting each chapter's mitigation strategies, these emissions will hopefully lower, and as IPCC has already got the world's most leading mitigation options in its reports, we are just synthesizing chapters that are hundreds of pages long into a couple of short lists, making it much more attractive and accessible to read, especially policymakers who don't have much time. So the IPCC report is important as it is the most comprehensive scientific consensus. The report represents the world's leading climate science compiled by hundreds of experts and reviewed by governments globally. It is evidence-based decision making. It provides synthesized and it provides policymakers, businesses, and communities with the latest data on climate trends, risks, and mitigation options. It also tracks progress and gaps, guides climate action, links climate, economy, and society, links and influences policy and global agreements. The next steps and our future goals are to finish the adaptation chapters, which is another 18 or so. And the secondary task of the project is adapting it to the UNFC into a framework for monitoring how close these options are to becoming technically feasible and socio-economically and environmentally viable. Lastly, sending a draft of the climate mitigation taxonomy to the IPCC. As Jeremy said, hopefully the IPCC will be curious and want to engage with it and give us feedback. But the worst case scenario is they don't engage with it at all. But the best case scenario is that they use the taxonomy or the framework in the next upcoming report. So fingers crossed. Thank you.
Any questions?
I've got a question. If when I read it, when I follow the media on these topics, it's depressing. It feels like the tide comes in and out, and but it's quite encouraging to see what the categorization of the mitigation factors. So what expectation have you got in the presentation of the importance of the mitigation factors being taken up by the decision makers to have more meaning? So you, at the end, you say you're going to present to IPCC reports. I mean, that's where can it go beyond that to have greater effect?
Well, our first step will be seeing the drafts, which will be on Excel spreadsheets, which is already captured through IPCC to see if they even want to engage with it and take it to the next step. And then I had some ideas where, like, kind of copying Amelia's idea of where we could do like an avoid, shift, improve diet, or avoid, shift, improve transport, avoid, shift, improve buildings and stuff, just to kind of make it not just
like looking at a list to kind of engage with it in a different way. And that's actually
And this is what I like about the process, because that's something I've never even thought of in terms of present. I was thinking, I'm an Excel guy, that's why these guys have worked with Excel. Listen, I'm excited, nobody else is. Avoid shift, fantastic, that's a fantastic way of presenting.
Have you thought of approaching the New Zealand government as it would be for this or the Climate Change Commission and developing a New Zealand focused version of it?
That'd be a really good idea. I haven't really got beyond just sending a draft to IPCC because it's been quite an intensive few months. But
I need to mention here, when Alicia first contacted me, I was still in the New Zealand government. And I thought, what's the most important thing that I need to kind of get working now? And at the time, it was, I don't know if I fully told you the story, Alicia, but the reason why I chose this particular project in the first approach was because I was working in the Climate Change Executives Board, so we were doing reporting for the Prime Minister and the Minister for Climate Change about how progress is going in New Zealand. It's one of the government's 9 key targets. I was responsible for target 9 in the reporting. So we were quite a central role. We have a plan, emissions reduction plan, we have emissions budgets. So tick, we got that. Then we have the emissions statistics coming out, and we can see if there's a gap. So we've got the emissions data coming out, it's reasonable, it's not brilliant, it's not perfect, but it's a reasonable job. Then we can do a gap analysis, see what's the gap, are we making the budget? If not, when there's a gap, what do? Well, you go look at the options. You go, here's the plan, but what are the things we could do in addition if there's a gap? That was where the problem was, because this is literally how it went. We would go to the government agencies and go, what do you got? Have you got anything? And they would say, give us whatever they had, or they would say, we tried this, but the minister's not interested, or this may be an option, but it's a bit untested. What I didn't know when we were asking, and this happened on a couple of occasions when we did do the old work round of the hat, I didn't know whether they were giving me everything. I didn't know whether they had looked at everything because I didn't have the list. So when Alicia said, hey, I'm looking to do an internship, I thought, well, maybe we can make the list so that we can integrate it as part of our work. Obviously, I'm not sitting in the government these days. I stepped out so that I had to have the time and space to do more of this type of work while also consulting internationally. But it was actually that very thing that, and your timing, that ended up why we have this particular project. Can we be, we're good here, we're good here, we're good here, and we're kind of ad hoc over here. Can we be more systematic and methodical? And maybe we'd find one extra thing which we hadn't thought of. Maybe the agency hadn't learned something that was coming up. And they go, oh, wow. Just by being comprehensive, being a bit more systematic.
Even in some of the sectors, like I'm involved with in the building sector in terms of, we've got projects on for Christchurch's first carbon negative building happening as we speak. But the thing of, you could take something like this to BRANZ, the Building Research Association, and I'm sure that there'd be interest. So I think that the applicability of what you're doing could actually be local within Aotearoa, New Zealand as well. I also think iwi would be interested.